Coming up on this week's show, a bizarre Mega Drive controller has been found.
Best horror games to play for Halloween.
And we chat adventure and RPGs with gaming historian Matt Barton.
This week's show is brought to you by Harry's.
Hello and welcome to the Retro Hour podcast, episode number 248. Your weekly dose of retro gaming and technology news with me, Dan Wood.
Me, Ravi Abbott.
And me, Joe Fox.
And a very warm welcome to this week's show. Actually, should it be a warm welcome on Halloween? Shouldn't it be like a chilly, spooky welcome on Halloween weekend?
It's definitely a chilly, spooky week where I live. I've had the heating on all bloody week.
Well, obviously, it is Halloween weekend when we're bringing this show out. And Halloween's going to be very different this year. You know, no Halloween parties. You won't be taking the kids out trick-or-treating. But a good excuse when the weather's cold to sit indoors and play some spooky video games. Now, it seems that every year on Halloween, we kind of do this. We go through some classic horror games that we're going to be playing. But we have actually got a little article from CBR.com that details some really good horror movie games that we'll talk about in just a bit. And actually, there's a couple of games that I've got picked out for the Halloween weekend that I'm looking forward to playing as well. So we are going to be getting all spooky on you in the Retro Hour podcast in the next few minutes. And of course, we're going to be joined by a very special guest on this week's show as well. Now, this week, actually, we're going to be joined by someone who was quite a big influence in the early days of us doing this show.
Yeah, so we're joined by Dr. Matt Barton. Now, you may know him from Matt Chat, which is a channel on YouTube. And if you haven't checked that channel, check it out because it was a massive influence on us. And, you know, Matt's wrote a lot of books. He's done some fantastic stuff linking Dungeons and Dragons to adventures and RPG and that whole kind of culture. So we've had so many guests on this show that have talked about how Dungeons and Dragons and the kind of initial ideas in roleplay and RPG were used and put into the gaming standards. And Matt has done some amazing interviews. You know, we've done some really good ones, but Matt's done ones that we haven't done, like Brian Fargo of, Wastelands. And he also does them with video as well. And they go on for a long time. So some of them are like 2 or 3 parters. So I really recommend checking Matt's channel out and listening to this interview.
And I love this chat that we had with him as well, because Ravi and I recorded this the other day. And really, I mean, you know, we didn't know what we're going into at first. We thought we were going to talk about the people he's interviewed, or are we just going to get really geeky about, you know, RPGs and adventure games? It ended up being a bit more of the latter. So we were totally in our element, weren't we, talking to Matt, just chatting about, you know, so, I mean, we love adventure games anyway.
I don't know what it is recently, but we seem to be on this like crazy adventure tip, don't we? You know, we had Ken Williams on, Charles Cecilia, now we're talking about adventure games again. I think, you know, with this lockdown, maybe we just want to get some adventure and kind of role play and play different roles in our lives, you know.
A bit of escapism from 2020.
Totally.
That's what this whole show's about, isn't it? So, we're going to be joined by Matt Barton for a great geeky chat if you're into your RPGs and adventure games. He'll be on the show in around 20 minutes from now. And also going to be catching up with a couple of old friends of the show as well, and Neil from RMC and John from Amigos podcast, because they've actually got a new podcast that we think you'll enjoy if you like our show. So we're going to get them on to chat all about that in the next few minutes. Before we do, though, some good news stories to talk about this week. Now, this has actually been all over Twitter. I've seen this prototype Sega Genesis controller that actually looks a bit like, some people are saying, Wii nunchucks. To me, it kind of looks a bit like a giant pair of AirPods.
You know what? I was literally just thinking they look like AirPods. I was looking at this. I've looked at it a couple of times and I was like, these just look like headphones, these two giant headphones. But yeah, this is really interesting. This has been posted on October 27th by a guy called Shane Bate or Bate You or something like that.
Yeah.
Not too sure where he's got these images from, but yeah, it's a prototype Sega Genesis controller, which essentially is held together by a piece of plastic, but it splits apart into like 2 nunchucks, which is really interesting. The concept behind it was you'd have the D-pad in one hand and your A, B, and C in the other hand, but you could switch which way you want. So you could have the D-pad in your right hand if you were left-handed, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Which I think is so far ahead of its time, because this would have been, what, like 88? This would have been kind of being looked at and played with and stuff like that, 1988, which is just so far ahead of the Wii. Even though, you know, it's not actually anything to do with the Wii. There's no motion control in it or anything like that, which I thought what the article was going to say, that it's got motion control in there. But no, nothing like that. But what I think is actually more interesting, what it just touches on, is it's actually got a trigger button on the back.
Yeah.
just like the N64 controller.
I think it looks, if you see it, it looks quite like the PlayStation controller, actually. When it's in the plastic case, you know, the long bottom ends of it. And if you think at that time, Sega, it was really flat and kind of rounded, wasn't it, on the Mega Drive? So, So it is really innovative in all kind of areas.
Yeah, I feel that, actually. Now you've said it, I can see the original without the analog sticks. I can definitely see it. I wish they did, like, not necessarily, you know, change the Sega controller, the Mega Drive controller, but it would have been cool to, you know, to actually get this, for it to have actually have come out.
I mean, if you look at the original tweet by Shane Battier, I think his name is.
Yeah.
He actually says the ergonomic handles on it are quite reminiscent of a Virtual Boy gamepad, which I can see that as well. I mean, this does look a bit of a hybrid of lots of things that have come along in years later. This didn't actually make it into retail production, but when you mentioned then, you know, the fact that if this was at the start of the Mega Drive's lifespan, that would have been late 80s. And that was also the period when I think companies were getting a bit more experimental with controllers. Obviously, we had the infamous Power Glove came out around then, didn't it? So I can understand maybe they were just kind of thinking, what's going to work? But I mean, you look at this, essentially it's two lollipops that you hold in your hand, and you've got the action buttons on one side and the D-pad on the other. But I guess, like you said, the thinking was that if you're left-handed or right-handed, you can kind of swap it around to suit your style of play.
Also, I like that it's like daisy-chained on the bottom, like to the other controller, because I can imagine losing one of these. Or you could get one of your mates and maybe with a game go, right, you play the buttons, I'll do the direction. And then you've got like a little two-player experience. Yeah, interesting concept, but could also imagine, you know, when your grand's sitting and playing and she's moving from left and right, and imagine you're just totally going mad with these, like hitting everything.
What I think is quite funny about them is because they're old school and the technology wasn't there, is that the button one just has two wires coming out of it. One daisy chain to the other and then one to the Mega Drive.
Nothing like internal or... Yeah.
Just
wireless.
I think having a Wiimote, you know, even if you've got it kind of strapped to your wrist, that's still hazardous enough. My mother-in-law was actually playing Wii bowling at their place, and my father-in-law was like, make sure you strap it to your arm. So I'll be fine. Threw it, smashed the TV screen.
Oh, gosh.
Had to get a new telly, so these things can be hazardous enough.
I remember when that happened because I remember your wife putting the claim in and they made out the dog did it. And I was just like, I don't think it matters how it happened.
Oh, busted.
The dog's not very good at Wii games.
He's not good at Wii bowling.
You know what actually would be good, you know, if they put these like these kind of handheld controllers together with, do you remember the Sega Activator? That was around back in the early 90s.
Is that the one?
Just look mental.
Is that the ring on the floor and you like punch and kick and stuff? Yeah, that would look crazy.
That would have been a Wii like over a decade before the Wii was even thought of.
How to hang yourself with a controller, like trip up and then get one side. Yeah.
Oh dear.
I must say these things do look, you know, like they'd be hideous to play like Streets of Rage or something with. But yeah, I do really want one. I think it would be fun just to.
I think they look really light as well.
Yeah.
Like if you had a bit of weight in them, they might be interesting.
Yeah, they look like you'd definitely swing that around your head like a bloody ball and chain when you're fighting with your older brother or something.
Now, of course, Cobra Kai has been something that everyone's been loving. I mean, I watched it when it was originally out last summer, but obviously that was when it was on YouTube. Now, Netflix have picked it up. This is the continuation of the original Karate Kid.
So good.
With the original actors in there as well. Everyone's loving it at the moment. And now there's actually a game that's available on the Switch, Cobra Kai, the Karate Kid Saga.
Yeah, I loved Cobra Kai when it came to Netflix. I didn't watch it on YouTube, but my dad watched it on YouTube. And he was like, watch it, it's amazing, like a year ago. And usually my dad doesn't really get into those kind of things. But like, and I watched it on Netflix, absolutely loved it. Showed my wife this earlier on who loved it as well. And she's like, oh, Cobra Kai game. And I was like, it doesn't look like a AAA title, unfortunately. But it still looks cool. But it's, you know, it's coming out on the 24th of November on the Switch. And apparently it's coming out at the point of recording. It says it's out today on PS4 and Xbox One, and it is a physical release game as well, but essentially it's a bit of a Streets of Rage clone, just a bit of a side-along beat-em-up, but you can play either as as Daniel, or you can play as, oh my god, what is his name? I know his real name. Johnny, there we go. I was like, his real name's William Zakba. I know that. And you could play as either the Cobra Kai or the Miyagi Dojo. So there's two kind of story campaigns, which looks pretty cool. But initial thoughts on the trailer, definitely not a AAA game. Definitely not a £35 game at release, in my
Looking
opinion.
at the characters, they look like they're from Sims 4. Like, the cutscenes for the FMV look really cartoony and stuff. But then the actual playing graphics, it just looks like straight up Sims 4 characters on a kind of cartoony landscape. Yeah, they could have made them look a bit better, I think, or a bit more 80s.
Yeah, definitely. And it's probably got a decent budget because of it's all the original voice cast. It's, it's Ralph Macchio and all that. They've all done the actual voices. And apparently the writers and stuff who wrote the new Cobra Kai series have had, it just says they were involved in making the story for the game.
Yeah, that's what everyone cares about in these kind of side-scrolling brawlers, the story.
Yeah, that's very true, yeah.
And I guess if it's got a banging 80s soundtrack and stuff, maybe,
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the soundtrack, it was half original, half kind of licensed songs in Cobra Kai, but it worked really well. So if they've done the same thing in this, it could work really well. But I'll be picking it up, but I'm going to pick it up when it's a tenner at Christmas.
Bananarama Cruel Summer better be in there.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, it definitely looks worth a play.
It reminds me weirdly of when they used to digitize fighting characters for like the early version of Mortal Kombat. Yeah. It just feels a bit rough. Like
yeah, like we want to be like, it's Cobra Kai, we love Cobra Kai. But I know what you mean. You kind of look at it as a gamer and just like, it looks a bit.
When they recreate those news stories on like Japanese TV, and it's always really funny.
Yeah,
kind of looks like that.
I can see it now. You've said that.
Yeah,
it does to me look very similar to. It looks like they've been heavily influenced by Streets of Rage 4 because you got that kind of very cartoony comic book style graphics. Again, it's a side-scrolling brawler, very in the vein of Streets of Rage or Double Dragon. And even the style of it and the colours and everything looks very much like a not as good version of Streets of Rage 4.
Yeah. I think you've got it spot on there. Like, if you enjoy Streets of Rage 4 and you want something a little bit more, but you're just going to accept it's probably not going to be quite as good, this is for you, kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, we've got Christmas coming up when, like, your mum asks you, what do you want for Christmas? And there's something just to say. Because, it is this time of year. What do I need?
Yeah,
but
definitely.
I'd probably play it and enjoy it, I think. But yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm not going to say I wouldn't enjoy it. I'd probably love it. I'd probably sit there loving it. But like I say, it's 35 quid. I could probably buy something different, something a bit different.
Get it down to a tenner. Joe's got
also,
it.
to a degree, like Cobra Kai was a bit indie, wasn't it? And it was a bit kind of developed.
Yeah.
So maybe this is like an indie kind of title where they haven't had as much budget as the other ones. But...
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I'm not going to sit there and rip it off and go, the graphics aren't as good as Tomb Raider or The Last of Us. Knowing full well it's not. It's probably had a 10%
small
of that
team,
budget.
Yeah.
Well, a console that it might run on, the new Atari VCS 2600. Now, we did actually talk about this when it was rumoured back in the summer when we heard about the pricing that I think was leaked on a website and also the release date as well. I mean, this has been going on for a long time, this story. We originally talked about it when that little trailer was released all the way back in 2017. So it's been 3 years in the making. But they have now announced UK pricing, £390 for the Atari VCS. The new console that looks very similar to the original 2600 Woody. You've got a wireless controller that's available in one that looks a bit like an Xbox controller or one that mirrors the original Atari joystick. And it is going to be released next month in November, pretty much meaning that it's going to go head-on with the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X.
It looks better than the PlayStation 5 or Xbox Series X, but I don't think it does more. Like, that's probably just because of the retro appeal. But we've talked about this before, how kind of this console, it's really hard to see the appeal of it. Like, the main appealing thing for me is the box. And I think if they sold that separately for about 150 or something, that they could make a bit of money. But going against the PS5 and the Xbox, I think it's a really, really kind of hopeful move on their account. Optimistic. That's the word. Yeah, optimistic.
You've said it before, Ravi. I think you said it last year when we were talking about it. You're spot on there. They should just sell the shell. Just sell the shell. For PC gamers and stuff for £100. Sell the controller. Sell the controllers as wireless controllers that can connect for PC gaming and stuff like that, or work on the Switch or whatever. I just don't see 390 quid, like you say, for what, £10 more or even £40 less, you can get the lesser new Xbox, whatever it's called, Series
Well, you look at
S.
no, it's $390 in America, isn't the new Xbox, the discless version, $299? So it's quite a lot less.
That's what I'm saying. It's more expensive than the discless new Xbox.
Yeah.
I mean, it does look nicer.
The expense was that custom motherboard. That custom motherboard where they got it printed with the Atari logo and Ryzen put on all of that and everything. But I'm sure you'd be able to kind of use the hardware of the other ones and do this. I don't know if there's going to be emulators commercially, but on paper, the other ones are a hell of a lot more powerful.
And, again, it's not a product that's going to be going up against them because, I think it's going to be a niche product. But with that kind of pricing, especially, normally if this had come out maybe a year ago, when I think it was originally rumoured to, no one would have compared it to the next-gen consoles. But it's the fact that the PS5 and the Xbox X are going to get so much attention over the next few weeks. It does seem like, I've seen people on YouTube saying, are they actually planning this thing to fail? Because it seems like suicide bringing it out only a week or two after those systems.
I think they've priced themselves out of the mini market. Yeah. That's the problem. The costs of making it has pushed them out of there. So maybe if they had a cheap FPGA board in there or something that would kind of reduce the cost. But at the moment, they're like the high end of the mini market, aren't they?
Well, that's the thing. It's not a mini console that's just designed to play retro games. But also, on the same footing, it's not a state-of-the-art console that's going to play high-end new games.
Or do ray tracing, or,
Yeah, it's kind of lurking somewhere in the middle, isn't it? Which, you're kind of looking at, like the Wii U did, really. When that came out, that was just around the same time. Admittedly, a bit before the PS4 and the Xbox One came out. But again, everyone looked at that as like, it's last year's technology because it can only run the same games as like the 360 and stuff. But this, I'm just struggling to see who's going to buy this. I'd be interested to hear from anyone that is going to buy the new Atari VCS. I'd probably pick one up if it was like £90 maybe. Yeah. That might be a bit more of an impulse, but just for the case and the controller.
Well, it might be in a few years. We'll see.
It might be by Christmas. You never know.
Yeah, we'll wait for it in the bargain bins next month.
Yeah.
Now, let's talk about another system. Now, this one really confused us. We were talking for about 20 minutes before we did the show, trying to figure out what is going on here. Now, this is a system called Polycade, and actually, quite interestingly, following on from the Atari, this is called the Polycade 2600.
Can I just name the polys? Because there's so many different polys out
there.
Go on,
name the polys.
There's
Polly Pocket.
There's Polly Pocket. There's the Polycade. There's the Polymega. There's the Polystation. And now there's the Polycade.
Ravi seems to have a better grasp on this, but me and Dan were really struggling. So this is essentially an Indiegogo campaign that started this week, and it's come from Tyler Bushnell, who's the son of Nolan Bushnell, which is really interesting as well. But it's weird because of like the actual thing is saying like, oh, it's a new console, which is the Polycade. I was going to call it the Polymega then, the Polycade console, which essentially looks like an Atari 2600, but plays other games. But
just like the Atari 2600 that's coming out.
Yeah, exactly. But what people seem to actually be backing is the arcade machines, which cost like thousands of dollars.
So we were talking with Dan earlier, and he was saying, I was going, oh, there's this Kickstart on Indiegogo, and they've hit 51K as we're recording this show. And then Dan goes, oh, there was a previous one before. So like, what's going on here? Like, how much did the previous one get?
Well, they ran one looking on Kickstarter, which is where the original campaign ran back in 2017, and it was successfully back then. That got $125,000, and this was for the Polycade Retro Arcade of the Future, which looks like one of the products that they're actually running a campaign for on Indiegogo at the moment. So we were trying to get our head around. If this has already been a successful Kickstarter, and it was only backed by 189 backers, so they must put a fair bit of money up front to get over 125,000. If these have already been delivered, is this like a second one that they're doing somewhere else?
Like a more redefined version, maybe?
But then they've also got a bit of software, the Polycade kind of interface that you can install on your PC that also runs the same stuff by the looks of it.
So from what I can see, you've got the Polycade 2600 Special Edition, which is the console version. That's $500.
300. Yeah, 384 quid as well. So
Yeah.
that's going against the Xbox and the PS1
you've
and the
got-
Atari VCS.
Then you've got the Polycade Lite, which is an arcade machine for £1,000. I do it in pounds. Then we've got the Polycade Lux, which is £2,300. Then we've got the Squadcade, which is a 4-player version, which is £3,000. And then for £6,000, you can get all of the above. Which
And it seems to be, really niche as well, because like the Polycade they've sold 14 of them.
I was
And
gonna
that's
say,
like the majority of the money.
It's the arcade machines that are selling. At this point of recording, the actual game console, which is what I read was the actual launch product, has sold 1 on the Indiegogo.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't hold big hopes of getting lots of software ported to it then.
No, I mean, apparently there's going to be 90 games on it, but essentially we've got like Bubble Bobble, Asteroids,
A lot of indie
Centipede.
games as well, like
Yeah, a lot of indie
Broforce
games.
and
Yeah.
You know what? Imagine if you backed that and you were the only guy in the world with that console. And there's like companies making games just for you.
Yeah, can
Got
you
some like
imagine?
signed contracts and everything.
Why don't you buy one, Dan, and let us know how it goes?
There'll be 2 then, though. Someone's already got one, haven't they?
Yeah,
I have to
that's
buy it
true.
off the guy that's just backed it.
But yeah, it's just a little bit confusing because, like you say, I think the one in 2017 was just for the arcade machine,
Yeah.
one of the arcade machines, but now there's 3 of them. So
You know what else is funny? The fact they've got this little 2600 lookalike console.
yeah,
The controller that it comes with, though, looks like a Super Nintendo controller.
yeah, the dog bone controller, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I don't know. The whole thing's just
it also
Very
seems, I
interesting.
don't know if you've scrolled to the bottom, but there's like a load of rappers with them as well. So like Snoop Dogg's got one, Ludacris has got one, Little John. And it's like, maybe these are just rappers that are buying this Polycade.
oh yeah, that's so weird.
Maybe it's just a rapper's console.
We were talking about Soldier Boy and his console.
Oh god,
A couple of years ago.
yeah.
And that just flashed into my mind then.
Yeah, when you said these rappers at the bottom of guy, I thought he was going to say, "Oh, Soldier Boy's going to be talking it with his Chinese tech."
But I mean, yeah, if you have got a load of money you want to burn on an interesting and very expensive project, there seems to be plenty of people vying for your money right now. I'll put it that way. So, Polycade, if you can get your head around it, do let us know. Now, of course, it is Halloween this weekend, and something we always do on the show every year, we talk about Halloween games. Now, I did mention that, Alone in the Dark's always one of my favourite games to play on Halloween, but I rediscovered something that I'd forgotten about, actually, a little demo that came out in 1993 called Jack in the Dark, and it's about a girl who goes trick-or-treating. Her name's Grace Saunders, and she goes into a toy store after dark, and all the toys come to life as well. And I remember seeing that on telly and thinking how fun it looked, and I downloaded it recently thinking, right, I'm saving that for Halloween. And I think it also came on the CD versions of Alone in the Dark 2. So that's my pick for this Halloween. That's what I'm going to be playing tomorrow night, a really good Halloween-themed video game.
As
Any
usual.
choices that you guys are going to be getting on?
As usual, Darkseid is always
Yeah,
the
yeah.
darkest, scariest game ever. Like, I still get scared thinking about that game.
I'm not sure what to play because I know I should play something because I'm such a huge horror film and horror game fan, and I'm like, I've not really done anything this Halloween, like any games or anything like that. And I'm looking at this article that we spoke about earlier on, and it's video game films, horror films, video games that we've forgotten about. And I'm looking at it, and there's the X-Files game for PS2, which is essentially a Resident Evil clone. And I keep seeing it on eBay for like 10 quid. And I'm like, you know what? If I buy that now, I might get it in the next couple of days and I could play that on Saturday night.
I'm
Because I
sure
love
I've
Resident
got that
Evil.
somewhere. I'm sure I picked that up at like Playtime, a local game shop that used to be in town years ago. And I think it's in a box never played in my garage at the moment somewhere.
I
I'm
need
sure
to-
I picked it up there. I didn't know about that.
Yeah, it's a Resident Evil clone, which
Right.
I've known about for years. And it's just one of those ones that I'm like, I need to pick that up. And I'm looking at this article, the other games are like the Saw game, the Predator game, the Jaws game and stuff, which are all kind of cool PS2 games and stuff. But yeah, X-Files, I'm thinking that's going to be
Actually,
the one.
I was playing Dead Rising the other day, and I forgot
Ooh.
how good that game was.
Yeah.
Like, the kind of photography stuff that you have to do in the middle of like these zombies all getting around you and everything. Really cool title that was, Dead Rising.
Yeah, I did enjoy the Dead Rising games. I didn't. Number 3 and 4 were okay, but number 1 and 2, I really, really got
Yeah,
into
number
them.
1, I was playing that.
Yeah,
I was like,
really
wow.
good game. Yeah, but yeah, no, definitely going to play a horror game. Definitely going to sit down, put indie to bed, and just, make my wife go to bed as well and just stay up all night.
Then wake the entire family up by screaming.
Yeah, maybe that could happen.
Well, this list on cbr.com, is 10 video games based on horror movies that you forgot existed. And you've got The Thing in there, which was a PlayStation 2 and Xbox and Windows game from 2002. Don't think I've ever played that one, but graphically that looks quite
Yeah, I had that. I still do have it. I got it when I was young on the PS2. Interestingly, hadn't actually seen the film, so it made me go buy the film on DVD. Well, I didn't go buy the film on DVD. I got my mate's sister to buy it me because I wasn't 18.
What was that? The Blair Witch?
No, The Thing. The Thing.
Ah, The Thing, sorry.
John Carpenter.
Yeah, that's a really, really, really good game, actually. And it's a continuation of the film. It's like you're playing a crew, like a mop-up crew who come to check out what happened. And the thing, the monsters are still there and everything. So once again, a bit of a survival horror game, but it's a over-the-shoulder third-person shooter, so it's a good one.
And then Friday the 13th, that came out on the NES.
Oh, God.
List as well.
That just reminds me of AVGN.
Yeah. The LJN logo on it, if you watch AVGN, you'll know that's one to be avoided. Land of the Dead, Road to Fiddler's Green. Was that a zombie movie then?
Land of the Dead was the fourth George A. Romero zombie film. It came out in like 2004. But the game didn't come out in the UK. It only came out in America, North America. It didn't come out anywhere else in the world for the original Xbox, which kind of says it all, really, on how good the game was.
And was he the guy who did Day of the Dead?
Yeah, he did.
Yes.
Night of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead. Then he did
kind of Dead Rising was based on that as well, wasn't it?
Yeah, but even though it says on Dead Rising, it's not based on Dawn of the Dead or affiliated with George A. Romero in any way.
Yeah.
Just trading on his good name.
Yeah.
Number 7 on the list, Blair Witch, the video game. Looking at this here, it's Blair Witch Project came out in 1999.
I went to the premiere of Blair Witch Project.
Oh, wow.
And we had people and they said, right, we've got sick bags underneath every single seat because people have been vomiting in cinemas throughout everywhere that it's been premiered, and it was a proper big deal. And then I saw it and I was like, really?
Yeah, you know why people puked up? It's not because of the action in the movie, it's because of the shaky cam.
Yeah.
Was it? Oh, wow. I was literally about to say it's more just like a jump scare kind of film, isn't it? I was like, why would it make you sick? But yeah, I didn't think of that.
Yeah, it was just mainly looking up the nose, wasn't it?
Yeah, night vision on.
Yeah.
Video game I've never played.
No, or have I?
Doesn't
look
that one great from what I've seen. Apparently, a survival horror game. Texas Chainsaw Massacre on the Atari 2600.
Such a good movie.
That's another AVGM one. Just reminds me of the video game nerd. Don't think
it doesn't look like
that.
a chainsaw though, does it? In this screenshot,
no, it looks like he's got a deformed arm.
That's definitely what I thought it was.
So I think maybe on the 2600 in 1983, just a little bit too early for a game that's going to really capture the atmosphere of Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Following on from that, you got Halloween, which apparently came from the same publisher. And yeah, looks just equally as awful. The Saw video game as well. I didn't play this one either.
No, I didn't play this one. I wasn't massively into the films.
No.
Either, but this is an
scared.
Xbox 360 game in 2009. So
way too modern.
Way too modern for us. Yeah.
Jaws Unleashed. Number 2 on the list as well, where you get to play as Jaws by the looks of it.
Yeah, on PS2. It was actually a relatively mindless good game, to be honest.
And then Predator Concrete Jungle. They came out on the PS2 and Xbox as well.
That's not a horror game. Why is that number 1? It's not even a horror game. Like, would you even call Predator a horror film?
No, really, an action movie, isn't it?
It's a sci-fi action movie.
Yeah, thriller, yeah.
When I was a kid, every single comic would be Predator-verse, Predator-verse, Predator-verse.
Alien versus Predator, Judge Dredd versus Predator, Batman, yeah, Superman at one point.
Actually, you mentioned Alien versus Predator. I think I'd rather play that than the Jaguar. That is quite a creepy game. Yeah. It's actually quite a spooky game.
I'm sure there's Mr. Blobby versus Predator somewhere.
If not, Ravi, get it made.
Get it made. Get it done.
So if you're going to check out the full list, I'll put that in our show notes at theretrohour.com. Now, time to talk to a couple of good friends of this show who've actually started a new podcast that you will enjoy if you like this part of the show where we talk about news.
Yeah, we've got Neil from RMC and John Shawler on the line, and they're going to talk about their new podcast, This Week in Retro. How are you doing, guys?
Great, Ravi. Thank you.
Hi, Ravi. Excellent. Well, it's good to have you on because I wanted to talk about this podcast. And first, how did you guys meet and what do you actually do? What are your channels?
Well, the first time I came across John was by watching his channel, The Amigos, which is very Amiga-centric, and I'm a huge fan of the Commodore Amiga. So I just sort of got to know him without actually getting to know him by watching his channel. And then at some point, I can't remember exactly where, our paths crossed and we got to interact with each other. So a relationship grew from there. How about you, John?
Yeah, I first came across you, Neil, from the list of supporters that I sing at the end of every episode, and after singing your name multiple times, I was like, "Who is this Retro Man Cave guy?" And then I looked, and it turns out that you were internet famous, Neil, and so I wanted to do a show that was different than the types of shows that I'd done before, which was very, review a game, talk about it. I wanted to do something that was a little bit more news focused and a little bit more wider ranging than just a single game for a single system. So I thought, nobody's doing a weekly news show that is only news about the retro scene. A lot of people incorporate a news segment within a larger show, but I thought that there might be an audience for a show that is only news and under a half an hour. So I asked Neil if he was interested. He said, yeah. And that's how This Week in Retro was born.
He said, Neil, I want to tap into that sweet audience of yours.
Well, I was going to say, because we do news on our podcast, but the main thing is kind of the interviews. But you guys have a unique aspect, which is it's a transatlantic podcast. We're all based in the UK. But here you've got someone based in the USA and the UK, and they're kind of getting differing opinions. And it's very computer based as well. It's a half an hour long show, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the fun thing. I mean, there was not really a plan when we started this out other than let's just see how it goes. Let's talk about the news and see what evolves. And actually, what has evolved is that really nice dynamic between John and I, this transatlantic dynamic where we have such different upbringings and memories of the same technology on different sides of the pond that invariably we end up with a difference of opinion and we get to discuss and explore those differences. And it's just really interesting. The news is really the vehicle to get into those discussions, and that's where the fun happens.
Yeah, that's really the springboard to say, well, what were your memories like whenever we talk about, say, a new Amiga game or a new game for the TurboGrafx 16? For example, here in the United States, the Amiga was, really a non-factor for most people here in the States, but it was huge in England. So the way that I approach the Amiga is going to be vastly different than the way that Ravi does. Likewise, a lot of the console developments, with the NES and things like that, that was a huge part of my life growing up, and maybe not as much for the majority of people in the UK.
Yeah, it's really interesting having these kind of different opinions, and it's very appealing to Retro Hour listeners, I think, because there's a lot of crossover stories there, but also we're huge fans of your channels. So just having both of you together on a podcast is entertaining anyway.
Yeah, it's great fun. It's great fun. I've got to be honest, it's also a really useful way for me to actually stay up to date with the news because, if you're asked to form an opinion on it rather than just skimming through news on social media, then it does get the old brain working. And I like to think that it challenges listeners in the same way. If we ask them to also question the things that we're talking about and consider their differences, then I think it's really healthy to dissect these things and question things like, do we really need another one of those mini retro console re-releases of which we're getting hundreds of at the moment? It's good to think about these things. I enjoy it.
Yeah, and one of the best things about the way that we do the show, and I blatantly stole this from another podcast, so don't think that I came up with this idea, but I was like, how are we going to source these stories? Because there's so much going on in the world of retro every week. How are we going to cut this thing down to 3 or 4 stories to talk about? And what we did was we actually set up a subreddit page for This Week in Retro where listeners can submit stories. They can vote stories up or vote stories down. And we use that as sort of a gauge of how popular these stories are and how much people want us to talk about them. And that's really been a big help to us in terms of putting the show together.
Yeah, there's some really good talking points that come up from the subreddit. And we're now actually starting to throw questions back into the subreddit. As well as them giving us news, we throw back a question that's come up in the podcast and get people to engage. So it's really interesting. And sometimes, I've got to be honest, sometimes the news stories that are submitted, they're not the kind of stories that you'd hear on other podcasts. It's just whatever's taken that person's fancy. We had an example last week where actually it linked to an article that was quite poorly written, But even so, it was a really good basis for a topic of conversation about gaming firsts. So we always find something to talk about. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's interesting.
And even though we do, I would say probably 80% of our stories are gaming related, we do try and touch on important milestones in just retro technology. For example, last week we talked a lot about the internet, the Ethernet connection has turned 40 years old. I don't know if you were aware, Ravi.
No,
I don't know if the BBC covered that or not. But,
I've still got one going up my stairs as well to my computer.
But sometimes it's fun to look back on those, just general technology and talk about our experience with that too.
I like the idea of it being democratic because the way that we choose ours is we have a shared Google kind of document and we put in what we find interesting. And then like one of us will go, that's far too console-y this week. That's far too Amiga-y this week. And our own kind of bias slip into there. So it's good because we also get different talking points. And I think the two podcasts contrast each other really well.
Yeah, it is very democratic. And that can actually mean that we're talking about things that we're not entirely comfortable with talking about because we don't have a particular huge amount of experience with that topic. But sometimes the most interesting conversations come out of that.
Well, how can guys find you then?
Well, the best place is probably anchor.fm/This Week in Retro. From there, you'll find links to all of your favourite podcast apps, or you can just search for This Week in Retro in whatever podcatcher app that you use.
We also put all of our episodes up on YouTube, and in the YouTube description, there's also links to each individual podcatcher. So no matter where you're listening to your podcasts, you can find us.
All right, thank you, Neil and John. And of course, we'll link up their website in our show notes at theretrohour.com if you want more retro in your podcast life throughout the week. Now, before we get into our special guest this week, Dr. Matt Barton talking about RPGs, adventure games, talking to gaming celebrities as well. He's coming up in just a sec. Before we do that, let's give a huge thank you to this week's sponsor. And this is our amazing friends at Harry's. Now, you know how much we love Harry's. And I can tell that at the moment, Ravi, even though I've not seen you for a few months, you are clean shaven, because otherwise I normally hear your stubble, scraping on the microphone.
Yeah, actually, I've shaved my beard off and I posted a picture of it on our Twitter, which was really good. I was using Harry's and it really helped because it's like the smoothest shave that I've had. And it really helped afterwards as well because you can get a bit itchy or a bit kind of rashy, but their kind of products really helped me with that.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of people are saying, "Oh, look at Ravi, all baby smooth." Because a lot of us will like lockdown all summer. You might, let your beard go a little bit. You want a bit of a tidy up, especially now coming into Christmas and everything. Well, listen, we want you to give Harry's a try, and obviously for supporting our sponsors, you're really supporting the podcast as well. So we really appreciate this, and we do find you the best deals, and we go with sponsors that we really believe are fantastic quality products as well. And they've got a great story behind Harry's. It's actually two guys, Jeff and Andy, who were fed up with overpriced razors, and they decided to fix shaving. That was their mission. And they knew the only way they could do that and ensure premium quality was by buying their own factory. And they've been making blades for 100 years now. And they've actually just released their sharpest ever blades and added in a new lubricating strip, meaning you're going to get an even closer and more comfortable shave. And the best part of it is as well, they haven't actually raised prices. So replacement blades are still as little as £1.95 each. So we want you to give Harry's a go and start your subscription with a trial set. So all you have to do to get the most comfortable shave, the closest shave you've ever had, nip onto this website right now, harrys.com/retro, and claim a trial set for just £3.95. And of course, you'll be helping out the Retro Hour podcast by doing it. So head to this website right now, harrys.com/retro, thanks to our good friends at Harry's. Now, let's get into the Hall of Fame this week. These are people who've made this podcast possible. The only reason we can keep bringing out an episode for you every single Friday, dedicating the time during the week to getting guests, getting our equipment, our microphones, our computers, the software that we edit it with, the websites that we host it on. There is a lot of stuff that needs to go into making a podcast like this each week. And really, we couldn't do it without your support. Now, we do have a Patreon that's running at the moment. We are going to record our next Patron's exclusive podcast as well. Over the next week. I think we're going to be interviewing Joe on this one. So if you've ever wondered what goes on behind the scenes of handsome Joe in his rock and roll life, You're going to get the full story on the Retro Hour After Hours podcast. I'm sure you've got some stories already in mind to tell, Joe.
It's just sausage rolls and peanut butter. Really, it's like nothing
That's a
too
euphemism
exciting.
if I ever heard one.
I'll keep out the window.
Now, of course, you're helping out the podcast by doing this. You're going to get an ad-free episode. Sometimes you get the show early. You get an exclusive patrons-only podcast. We're posting videos there. We do a monthly hangout as well that we are going to be doing this weekend on Sunday evening. So if you want to join us for an hour to have a bit of a chat, we couldn't do it last weekend in the end, so we've moved it. So there is still time if you want to join us this Sunday night. The link will be on our Patreon. And of course, you will get a mention in the Retro Hour Hall of Fame. And let's give a big thank you to our newest patrons. Thank you to Joshua Pike,
Jeffrey Gebhardt,
Casey McGinty,
Count Duckula, Ducky Poos,
and Nicholas Lindholm,
who all made donations into our Patreon. And if you'd like to do the same, you can find it right now on our website at theretrohour.com. Right then, next, we're going to be talking adventure games, RPGs, with gaming historian Dr. Matt Barton. You're listening to the Retro Hour podcast, and it's time to welcome on this week's very special guest. Now, we can't wait for a great nostalgic conversation with this week's guest, who runs a channel called Matt Chat that is actually one of the... We mentioned this to Matt before we started recording. It was actually a big inspiration for us setting up this podcast. He does really in-depth interviews with professional video game designers, developers, people behind companies. So if you love what we do on this show, you're probably a fan of him already, but if not, do check him out on YouTube. He's called Matt Chat. So it is our pleasure to welcome to the Retro Hour podcast, Matt Barton. Hello, Matt.
Hi, Dan. Thank you. I'm very honored to be here. Thank you for that. Very, very nice. Thank you.
Well, before we get into the kind of things you've been covering on your channel over, many years now that you've been doing it, I mean, it'd be quite interesting to find out a bit about your personal story. I mean, where did your experiences with video games and computers begin?
I guess it must have began at the beginning. Sometimes I think I had a USB cable instead of an umbilical cord, attached to my... we were playing games with both my parents. We would play games on the Commodore VIC-20, I think was our first computer. And then from there, the Commodore 64, and then the Amiga 1000.
Nice.
The rest of the arcades, pretty much a gamer family, I guess. And I used to, being a kid, you just think, well, everybody's family must be like this, So yeah, really, really fun childhood memories. Lots of games, lots of computers.
Were there any arcade games that you made a beeline for that you always run straight to in the arcade?
Well, the early ones I remember, my dad would actually designate me as the fire button boy. So we'd be playing Sinistar, I think, and he would fly the ship around, and my job was just to hit the fire button as fast as I could. So that's probably my first memory of that. But yeah, I love the Bubble Bobble's one of my favorites. I like Robotron. One that I like a lot is Green Beret. That one to me is there's just something about that one that always captures my attention. There's very few that I just won't play. If I'm lucky enough to come across one, I'll pop in a quarter.
Well, many of our guests on the podcast have mentioned how influential D&D was. Were you much of a D&D player? And how important were these titles to gaming culture before computers were really massively popular?
Oh, absolutely huge. I think especially on the computer game side, they really played a big role. No matter how far back you want to go. I mean, what was it? Maybe in that adventure game, Colossal Cave Adventure.
Yeah.
Sometime in I guess that was the early 70s, maybe. I don't have my notes in front of me, but, obviously those guys were big into it. In a lot of those games, the idea was to see if we can take some of the fun of the tabletop Dungeons and Dragons game and turn it into a computer game. My story is a little bit interesting because I grew up way out in the country, the deep south of the United States. Louisiana. So there really wasn't anybody around there that I could have played with, even if I'd wanted to. So I got my exposure to D&D came through the different computer games based on it. So I got into D&D through that instead of the other way around. But yeah, I think of all the people I've interviewed on Matt Chat, I'm pretty sure 99% of them played Dungeons and Dragons at some point, if not extensively. So it made a huge impact.
And what like kind of texts or novels do you think have massively influenced the way that games were made or designed back in those early days?
Well, certainly Tolkien comes to mind, but some of the other ones, let's see, Michael Moorcock, his works come up more than you would think. Jack Vance is his name. Whew.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, his name comes up a lot. Doc Smith. So basically a lot of the, I guess if you could, putting Tolkien aside, a lot of pretty much any of the pulpy 50s and 60s sci-fi and fantasy type authors played a big role. Those are the ones that certainly come to my mind.
Were you kind of playing any BBSs or any MUDs or those early kind of multi-user dungeons?
Oh yeah. Yeah, those were my crack cocaine. I loved MUDs. Man, the first time I saw one of those, I didn't get to play that until I was in college. And I didn't even know anything that amazing existed at that point. But I was at a computer lab, and this was really before the World Wide Web had come there. People that were online were using Telnet and Pine and things of that, Unix, I guess. And there was this guy sitting next to me playing that, and I kept looking over there, and I'd see like Dragon on the screen and like the dice rolling and things. I've always been a shy guy, so it took a lot for me to get up enough nerve to go over there and like, what are you doing? What are you playing? And he's like, it's a MUD, man. And I just sat there. I would not leave until he explained like what it was and how do I create a character on that. And man, I don't think I left that. They had to kick me out of the lab that night so they could close. I mean, that was one of the most amazing games I've played. I don't remember what your other question was, but yeah, MUDs. Oh, BBSs. Yeah, I played those. I played around with those a little bit. Again, being way out in the middle of nowhere, pretty much any BBS was a long distance call, and I didn't have any money. So that really wasn't an option. There were a few on 1-800 numbers you could call. I did that a little bit. I did get to play some of Seth Robinson's games. Legend of the Red Dragon was probably my favorite.
One of your kind of early videos was when you were talking with Richard Barton, and I absolutely love that because he invented the class system, and that's very much in gaming now, and it's a kind of standard that's been set there. Did you notice that there was a lot of kind of early standards that were being set that you can now even see today in like multiplayer or RPG titles?
Yeah, certainly. I think that a lot of the groundwork for even something like World of Warcraft, it's pretty clear. You can see the MUD origins of that. And I think Bartle in particular, he was more, or I guess he still is. He's good at making the games, but he's also good at thinking about them theoretically and talking about them intellectually, if you will. So you can really get immersed not just in the games he made, but all the writings that he's done on the topic. I mean, I was really so honored to get to interview him.
Well, we mentioned at the start about your YouTube channel. I mean, one thing I didn't mention that I should have is that you're also an author as well. And a book that you did, Dungeons and Desktops, The History of Computer Role-Playing Games, was released in 2008. Why did you think that book was needed then, and what made you want to write that?
That book started as a blog post. Back in, I don't even know if anybody was using the term blog back then. But I just wrote up a little. We had an online magazine, we called it, called Armchair Arcade. And we just come up with we thought about it kind of like a magazine, something like Amigo World, I guess. And so we'd have all these different topics. And I did one time just sort of casually on the history of computer role-playing games. And for whatever reason, that article just took off. I mean, the feedback, the comments, it was, obvious that there was something there, worth following up on. And I wanted to say it was Game Set Watch, another blog from the Gama Sutra brand. But they contacted me. They wanted to take my blog post and put it on their blog and pay me for it, and then have me do a couple of follow-ups to it. I think I was probably in my early 20s at this point, And I wanted to say that might have been the first time I ever got paid to write something. So that was fun. Back then there was this big spurt of interest in reading about video games. So there was a book publisher that had come to them and asked them if they had ideas for books, or if there were authors on the blog that might be interested in writing a book. So they basically came to me for Dungeons and Desktops rather than the other way around. But that's the ideal arrangement, really, if you can get it.
And I think you're right as well, because it did kind of seem around that time that was kind of when interest in, retro games, if you like, kind of began. I guess it's because it got to that stage where there was actually enough history there for people to kind of retrospectively look back on it, I guess.
Yeah, it kind of fizzled out, sadly. But I remember there for a while, I thought I was just going to be a superstar because, I did it started with the blog, then it's a book, then believe it or not, there was a guy calling us about, hey, let's turn it into a movie. Let's do this feature film thing. That's what became that gameplay documentary. But sadly, it kind of, like I say, sort of fizzled out there eventually. Maybe it's ready for its second comeback, though. That'd be nice to see.
So when you started the YouTube channel, was this like a direct reaction to the kind of people that were looking at your book, and also kind of a bit of an experiment?
Yeah, that was definitely an experiment. I'm the kind of guy, I get bored doing any one thing after a while, so I like to branch out and try new stuff. And I kind of felt like I'd done the blogging thing for long enough. I wanted to see if I could tap into this YouTube phenomenon. And of course, back then it was mostly cat videos and dogs on skateboards. You had about 10 minutes to work with. So yeah, I wanted to see if I could do something with the book. And one of the things that bothered me about writing Dungeons and Desktops was that it was a lot of the times it's hard to describe in print form. Even if you have screenshots, it's sort of hard to describe what's happening in some of these games. It's a lot easier if you can show it. So I was excited about that concept. And plus, I really like interviewing people, as you guys seem to. It's a lot of fun just to have a chat.
And I think as well, when you're interviewing people that kind of made the games that you grew up playing and actually hearing it, from the horse's mouth, as it were, it's kind of like, if you told yourself you'd have been doing that 25 years ago, you'd have been like, what? No way. Will I be talking to Richard Barton or something like that?
Oh, yeah. It makes you feel pretty cool. In a lot of these games, my dad, like I say, my whole family's interested in these games. And I get to tell them, I talked to the person that made this. I've talked to Becky Berger, Well, I've talked to Lord British. You really feel good about that.
Well, when you originally approached like these famous developers and people that made these games, what kind of made you decide that you were going to do that? And did you think at first that they were going to be up for it, or you're a bit like us and thinking, oh, they'll never talk to us, and then you get a pleasant surprise when you get like a tweet back or an email or something?
Yeah, for me, the hard part was always just finding them. A lot of the people I was interested in talking to, they had been out of the game industry sometimes for 10, 20 years, even at that point. So it's tricky to find them. But even some of the bigger names, I've had some pretty big names on the show, but, back when I was doing it, usually the first thing they would tell me is, you're the first time I've ever been interviewed. I had several people tell me that, or you're at least the first time it's been on video or live. I guess back in the magazine days, they might just write back and forth or answer some questions, maybe over the phone, I'm guessing. But it was new to them. A lot of them had not really been interviewed in that format before. And so, it was kind of weird for me because I'm kind of like almost doing the whole Wayne's World. I'm not worthy. But they're looking at it like, this is my chance to be on YouTube. It was really kind of bizarre there for a while.
Were any people kind of like, why do you want to talk about old games, or why do you want to talk about old stuff that I've done?
They totally don't get it, because a lot of these, it's not like they're always on the internet searching for their own games and seeing what people are talking about. A lot of these folks are like, I had no idea people were still interested in this. I got that reaction more times than you would think. And I think it really, it was a big deal when the games were new. But, here we are 10, 20 years later. And when they hear that there's somebody that's still interested in their work, I think they're really eager to talk to you. They love it. A lot of people will ask me to interview somebody who's just come out with a game. It's a big deal. And those are usually the hardest people for me because they're sort of, their hands are tied in so many ways. They can't talk about this. They can't talk about that. They might have a handler, there. I don't really like doing those kind of interviews, to be honest. I'd much rather just be talking to someone who, it doesn't matter to me if they haven't made a game in 10 years.
Which titles really kind of captured your imagination then as a child or growing up, and whether they be role play or not?
Some of the ones I remember, I was thinking about one just the other day that I haven't really heard many people talk about. It was called Mindwalker.
Oh, yeah. An Amiga title as well.
Yeah, an Amiga title. Yeah. There was one called Alien Fires. These really weird sort of games. And I remember playing those as a kid and just thinking, man, I wonder what kind of person made this. They must be really far out. But yeah, just the games I was spending most of my time with would be something like Bard's Tale, one of my favorites. Pool of Radiance was really the first one that I ever cared enough about to sit down and actually figure out how to play it well enough to beat it.
You can tell that you're a fan of Bard's Tale because there's so many videos on it on your channel as well.
Yeah, I had my wife make me a Bard's Tale hat. If you watch the Bard's Tale video, I actually have a sequence at the end where I play the song from the first game, and I'm kind of in my Bard's Tale costume.
Nice.
I don't know. I do some nerdy stuff sometimes, guys.
Oh, we love that. The nerdier, the better for our show. It's awesome. I mean, you mentioned before about MUDs. I mean, do you think when, multiplayer elements came in and different users, did that kind of drastically change the gameplay experience for, RPGs, for example?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question because I don't know about you, what your experience was like. For me, when I was playing those MUDs, it just seemed like I was meeting just really fascinating people on a daily basis. I was making friends on there, and pretty soon, I think Barton talks about that. I forget what he calls it, but the process by which you go from caring about your character and leveling and grinding up your levels and stuff to just wanting to log in to socialize, the people that you met. And I think that dimension somehow got lost. When I play World of Warcraft, I hardly ever meet anybody on there. You think there would be a lot more people to chat with on there. But something, it's just never been the same really for me. I don't know if sometimes I wonder if maybe the MUDs, the barrier to entry was high enough that you only got people that were sort of nerdy. And so you'd have some stuff in common with them to talk about sort of baked in. Well, the more modern games, you really don't need any special training or anything to create a character and an account. But
I think you make a good point there, because I remember when I first got on the internet in the mid-90s, and you'd spend all day on IRC, or chat rooms were massive back then. But now I think people maybe just take it for granted that you can just talk to anyone around the world at any time. I think back then it was a bit more special, it seemed.
Yeah, I kind of compare it. I've talked to people. I've never done it myself, but one of my dad's hobbies was the ham radio. And I remember it sounded like sort of similar to that, so you took so much training to even know what a ham radio is, much less be on it and chatting with people from around the world. But you sort of got this built-in shared or sort of built-in common ground, right? Just the fact that you're on the ham radio and that you are part of that scene, I guess. So that dimension seems to have gone away, or at least diminished somewhat.
How did you feel about the kind of adventure games that all turned into FMV games? And it was a bit like the period before adventure just really disappeared and became a bit of a niche.
Yeah, that's always been sad to me. We were talking before about Monkey Island. Still, somebody dumped their Amiga out on the side of the road, and
Yeah, I was, just to update the listeners, I was telling Matt about me walking a dog and then kind of seeing an Amiga on the side of the road with Monkey Island and everything there.
Oh, wow.
And I was just like, right, score. But, someone was chucking that out at the death of adventure games or kind of point and clicks.
Yeah, but I mean, those games are beautiful games. And even before that, even if you want to go back to the Infocom days and Zork and Planetfall, Hitchhiker's Guide. I mean, you guys know these games, right?
I was so frustrated at Hitchhiker's Guide. Oh,
Hitchhiker's Guide is awesome.
Yeah, I love it. It's the most unfair video game I think I ever played.
Well, those games were, some people don't realize this now, but those were like the biggest hit, best-selling games of the time.
Yeah.
These things were huge. This was like the AAA, experience, and it was all text. But, I still like to play adventure games. I don't know where people get off on this idea. Adventure games are dead. The adventure games, they're too boring. There's actually one out. I just played one called Beautiful Desolation. I would consider that an adventure game.
And I think there's something beautiful about text adventures as well. Like kind of going back to the earliest kind of form of adventure games. The fact that it's kind of equated to like compared to reading a book and watching a movie. It gets your imagination really going, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does. I've had Scott Adams on. And I've talked to the Zork folks over email. I'd love to get them on the show one day. Yeah, I remember Infocom. There's one of their famous advertisements was a picture of a brain, and the caption was something like "the greatest graphics technology ever invented." It just kind of makes my skin tingle to think, even thinking about that ad. I mean, that's kind of a wonderful way to put something like that. But yeah, it's so easy to get. I think here's the thing. I think when you're trying to market games, it's a lot easier if you can show people this awesome cinematic. Or back then, the graphical adventure games or the graphical games, you could put those screenshots on the box, and that becomes a selling point. And people can look at it, see what's going on in the screenshot, and get a picture of what playing that game is like. The text adventure game, though, it's a little bit trickier to communicate the fun of that just by looking at screenshots. So I think that was part of their problem.
We're going to go into online again, and I was just thinking, these MUDs and the rules and restrictions. Do you think they're needed in modern MMOs with the kind of sandbox feeling and people going and creating their own adventures rather than sticking to a set line or a set quest?
You mean sort of more of an open world?
Yeah, so these kind of zombie games at the moment, or there's lots of kind of just sandbox games. GTA Online, you'd kind of just do your own thing. Do you think there's room for that as well as the kind of rules and restricted ones?
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, that's what I've always preferred. I get that. I guess people feel like they don't have enough time to invest in something that's too massive. I don't know what the deal is. But certainly something like what is it, Elite Dangerous, and I don't know what the status of Star Citizen, if that ever takes off. Or EVE Online, I guess. There are some out there that seem to me to kind of capture that. Oh, go ahead.
Well, one of the interviews that I actually loved that you did was about Richard Garriott and how he'd tried to implement rules and restrictions into the original Ultima, and it went massively wrong.
And, it's fun to talk to him. And a lot of his side hobbies that he has, like collecting those automata, little wind-up toys, basically, and like his Halloween parties that he would throw, and this house that he built. It sounds like it's not unrelated stuff, but really, I think it's part of his personality that gets somehow or another inputted into his games. That sort of love of just tinkering around with things and building stuff and winding it up and seeing what it will do. But yeah, so you might have to remind me. What did he say about the rules and restrictions?
There was a thing where he was trying to introduce animals into Ultima, and they all ended up getting killed, and then he tried to enforce some kind of laws, and then somebody came and killed him, his character in game.
Oh, you're talking about Ultima Online. Oh, yeah, yeah.
There's a big assassination attempt.
Oh my God. You got to go back and see if you can find the original Ultima Online manual, and read that, because they're giving you this advice about how you're supposed to behave as a player. It's like, I don't think that lasted for 2 minutes.
Yeah.
I mean, you're supposed to be like, hail, warrior, or hail, sir, whatever. Like, sort of that quasi medieval dialect. And all this stuff. And I'm pretty sure that the game hadn't been online for 2 minutes before there was all kinds of miscreants. People just want to have they want to see what they can get away with, right?
Always pushing the boundaries.
Always pushing. I mean, how many people are talking about, that played the original Ultima games? I mean, come on, you hit list, you saw the game code, you made some changes just to see what you could get away with, right?
Well, you're an English professor as well. I mean, do you ever use gaming or RPGs in your classes?
Oh, sure. And we're actually trying to get some game courses here off the ground, just first and foremost about games. I think it's still useful. This is actually one of my themes, is that you still do need to know how to program and understand, like, C# or whatever. But it's increasingly to the point where, you could make a game if all you have is, quote unquote, all you have is good writing skills. Those skills alone are enough to help you pretty much make a solid game. The rest there's so many assets you could download. If you're not good as an artist or not good with music, there's all those assets are available. But the part where the creativity is still needed, a lot of that can come just from having a good imagination and being able to write it out.
How do you feel about like user created content and modifying games as well, kind of changing them from their original purpose by the community or the players?
I think it's fabulous. That's one of the reasons I like computer games. Still do. I kind of prefer computer, the PC platform, if you will, over the consoles, because I always felt like the computer side did that better. There's always this idea that you're buying this not just to, even like the Commodore 64, of course, the Apple II, those computers, it wasn't just for playing games. The idea was you could make some of your own games. And I think that's how a lot of people get started with that, was they didn't want to just make their own game from scratch. Their first exposure might have been looking at the source code of a game they owned, especially if it was written in BASIC. And then they could change some stuff around and see how that changed the gameplay. They probably, let's be honest, you probably just wanted to give yourself unlimited hit points, unlimited lives or something. But you sort of got aware of, hey, there's all this code running underneath this game. It's kind of like, popping the hood of your car and just like looking at, there's all this stuff going on. You're getting really like curious about how it all works.
I think you're right, because I think a lot of kids' kind of first programming experience was like, poking and peeking on the Commodore 64 to get unlimited lives.
Yeah, and the same thing with these mod engines and things. Like, I kind of want to just do this goofy thing where I'll just take this game and maybe I'll put my friends into it. This annoying kid at school, let's just make him the enemy and create a little level around. Just kind of goofy. What kids are like, But just in the process of that, they're also learning about these components, and heck, those are pretty valuable insights.
Well, obviously, as kind of technical achievements increase and capability of computers and consoles, do you feel now it's kind of a fine balance between gameplay and graphics in modern games?
I could say that, and I agree with that, but I mean, you can go back to the ColecoVision days and see that.
Yeah.
Look at the graphics on or was it the Intellivision? The sports games on the Intellivision are just like you're in the, just like you're on the field, No, it's not. No, I know what you're saying, though. I think that is, sadly, I was making a joke the other day that, the new consoles, the next generation of consoles are coming out. My God, they're going to have, 4 trillion colors and this and that. And what game are the kids playing? Minecraft.
Yeah.
It just doesn't, I never have thought that, just having better graphics makes it a better game per se. I mean, there's so many other important things.
It always seems to be the thing to sell consoles on, though, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, because, it's just something you can easily show people. You have a television commercial and you're like, wow, look at that. It looks more realistic than looking out the window. I don't know. So that's kind of exciting. A good example of that nowadays, I think, was with the VR, all these VR headsets and things. I mean, it's really exciting technology, and it really gets your juices flowing as a nerd, something like that. But I don't think they've quite figured out how to make that, real killer app for it yet. Something that's just so fun that people that don't really care. So the people that aren't impressed with the technology would still want to play it just because it's fun.
Yeah, or experiences that you want to return to over and over again. I mean, I've got a couple of VR headsets, and after you've done the, kind of watching a movie in IMAX style on it, or playing a couple of the games, I've got a couple I've put on the shelf and just haven't used for months.
Yeah, exactly. They need their version of Tetris is what they need. Just something that's just, even if I don't give a damn about VR, man, I've got to play that game. I'll get the VR just to be able to play it.
Testament to these kind of old games, a lot of them are being redone, and you're getting these old worlds being revisited with like reduxed versions with better graphics. Which titles would you like to see kind of redone and a redux of?
Oh, good question. Well, I would say Pool of Radiance, but that's sort of been done already. There's that Gold Box engine companion sort of wraparound for it. That would certainly be something. I'm trying to think maybe a little bit older. The Ultima games have already gotten a remake, at least the first few. I'd have to think a little bit more about that. I'm trying to think of like a RPG that's a lot of fun, but just has a really cumbersome interface. Because I think that's probably where what would make the big difference. Not so much just it looks better, but if they can, especially those older games where you had to basically memorize all these keys on your keyboard, like K for kill, L for this, T for that. Some of those games, if you overhauled the interface, you could make something a lot more playable.
It does kind of feel like that's one area that we've massively improved upon in the last 20 years, even just user interfaces and knowing how users are going to interact with a game compared to back in the 80s.
Yeah, something like Ultima Underworld even. That's a little bit hard to get around. If you're used to modern games, and I don't think that would be too hard to go back in there and redo that. You do have to walk a fine line between appealing to the people that played the original game and making it feel faithful, I guess, to them.
Yeah.
But at the same time, the whole point is to wow people and appeal to the people that never played that game before. That's a delicate balancing act. I often feel like you'd be better off just making something new than going back, but I could be dissuaded.
Especially these games that have been around for so long, and a lot of them were an inherent part of our childhood, and then seeing them kind of get messed with, if it's not done in the right way, it can be quite an emotional thing sometimes if they do it wrong.
Well, even like the Baldur's Gate 3 situation that's gotten people so riled up about her. I think that In Exile did somehow or another with the new Wasteland games, they seem to have been able to strike that chord. At least I haven't found too many people that were just hating those games because they didn't feel enough like the original Wasteland. You could see a difference between people talking about Wasteland 2 and Wasteland 3 versus the people. They have a different opinion of the new Bard's Tale. If you remember that earlier Bard's Tale, the PlayStation one, that's where you go wrong, I guess. Even though I liked both those games okay, something about it just didn't quite work. The graphics are better, sure. But is it a better game?
Have you kind of noticed that there's been a resurgence of adventure titles and also point-and-click titles recently?
Well, that's something I try to promote as much as I can. Julia, what's her last name? I just interviewed her. But she's doing one called The Crimson Diamond.
Which one was that? Sorry, Crimson Diamond.
The Crimson Diamond.
Yeah, Crimson Diamond Store.
Julia Minamata.
Yeah,
she's fantastic. I mean, that's incredible. If you want something that captures that retro vibe. But of course, there's other ways to do that too. Really, that Beautiful Desolation game. To me, that's one of the most artistic-looking games I've ever seen. I wish there would be more games that were like Mist and Riven, because that's you're talking about FMV before. I think that got a bad rep.
I was going to say, actually, you were talking about visiting old titles, and I played Myst the other day, and the spinning around on the camera made me feel so sick when you move left to right.
Oh yeah, it was just like rendered images, wasn't it? But I remember seeing those in like magazines and just thinking, video games can't look that good.
Well, that's the thing about Myst and Riven that really stands out to me. Again, was just normal people buying that. And one of the reasons they would buy it is they would say, this is an IQ test. Playing Myst and Riven makes you smarter. There was that kind of belief, like you had to be basically a genius. It's like a Mensa test or something, being able to play that. And, that to me I actually thought that was appealing. Like, it's not a game that dumbs you down or anything. It's like the opposite of that, right? Which I think is great. I feel that way about all adventure games. You feel like, oh, I solved that puzzle. Look at me go,
And I guess with Myst, we just got like CD-ROM drives on our 486s. We wanted something to play on them.
Well, I've heard that people would see Myst on display somewhere and just be so amazed by it, they would actually upgrade their PCs just to play it. You remember a lot of people back then were rocking like the Hercules CGA, that was not even CGA. It was like the monochrome.
Yeah, I think those games definitely did a lot to kind of push technology forward, didn't it, and make us spend more money.
Well, especially on those PCs. Remember this was, I guess that was pre-Windows. When was that? Myst was like 92, I think.
93, I think it might have been. Yeah,
93.
so it was pre-Windows 95. Yeah,
early
3.1
days,
then.
yeah. I don't think everybody had unless you had the Amiga or the Atari ST.
Well, you also wrote an insider's look at the history of Grand Theft Auto as well, and Super Mario and other influential games as well.
Oh, sure.
Because that's different to all the RPG and adventure stuff we've been talking about. These are kind of pure arcade games. So why did you write that one then? Tell us a bit more about that.
Well, I've always been just interested in the industry as a whole. I wish that I knew more about the Japanese language and culture, because I feel like there's a whole... I've read some books on it. It just seems like there's new ones coming out. But, I feel like that's a very influential part of the story is what was happening in Japan, all throughout the 80s and 90s on up till today. To be honest with you, a lot of that has to do with when I talk to somebody and I say, I write books about video games. And usually their first question would be about, like Mario or Pac-Man or maybe Donkey Kong. So I felt like I wanted to talk to them too. And a lot of those folks wouldn't be as interested in, say, Pool of Radiance or Bard's Tale. They don't even know what that is. But if you're talking about, say, Final Fantasy, or I guess, what else is in this book? Space Invaders. That was their entrance into video games, right? Something like Grand Theft Auto. And that, I think it makes them happy to read about the history of that and, think about it. Not just as just something that was fun, but sort of start thinking about the design of it, maybe even the philosophy behind it.
Well, out of all of the interviewees on your channel, which one would you say is the best for someone checking it out for the first time, and which one was your favorite?
Oh, favorite. The one that I'll tell you this: the one that most people start with is John Romero. That's the one that people watch first and seem to associate me with. More than the other ones, but certainly a lot of those early ones. I always thought that the one I did with Becky Berger Heinemann was really good. But probably one of my favorites that doesn't get talked about a lot. The reason I like it is because he was my influencer, my inspiration really for doing what I do was Stuart Chaffee. He had a show on public broadcasting here that I watched as a kid called Computer Chronicles.
Yeah.
And he was talking back when it wasn't retro, it's like the brand new Amiga 500, So I just watched that and just be hanging on the guy's every word, just thinking this is the coolest person I've ever seen. So I loved it. It was really fun getting to interview him. I really had that kind of surreal experience because he was somebody. A lot of these developers and really John Romero too. I played their games, but I hadn't really seen them. Before. So that was a new experience. Whereas with Stuart, I'd seen him on TV many, many, many times. So that was kind of an interesting feeling, interviewing the person that I had seen and heard from so much.
And he charted the entire rise of the personal computer revolution, didn't he? Because that show was like early 80s it started.
Oh, yeah. I'm really glad they're archiving all that. And, when I talked to him, he was saying that it's been a while, but it seemed like I remember him saying that he was a little concerned about some of those archives. He wanted to make sure that was available somewhere. I mean, he recognizes the historical nature of all that. I think even back then, I think he was aware that this was important stuff that he was documenting and the people he was interviewing. I mean, it's not just just a profit thing or just gadgets. This is going to have a big impact on our society.
And they're great watch those old episodes. I think I've probably watched every single episode of Computer Chronicles on YouTube or archive.org. It's just great watching them.
Yeah, it's just so good. And I like this, to me, just the way he approached the topic. He was, always serious, but at the same time, he's being serious. You can tell just looking at the guy. Just look at his eyes, He's just loving it. He loves that stuff. And it's really addictive to me, watching those episodes. I don't know too many people that have really done it better than him. So many times people don't really, they have this sort of weird thing, like it's video games, right? So you have to be wacky or you have to drop the F-bomb every other word, something like that. Whereas, I think he's a lot more respectful of it. I guess, it wasn't like Computer Chronicles was all video games, but I think
they covered everything, didn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not as interested when they talk about like the latest database or word processing.
Yeah, like I said, I've tried to watch every episode. There are a few that I watch. I'm like, do I really need to learn how to do spreadsheets on an IBM XT? Probably not.
There's probably somebody, I bet you some of your listeners are like, oh, I love those. Those are my favorite. Yeah. Like nobody talks about Infocom's Cornerstone software. I bet there's an episode dedicated to that somewhere.
Well, it's a great archive. I mean, everyone that finds our chat interesting should go check it out on YouTube or archive.org. And it's great that you get these guys on your show, Matt. What's kind of next for your channel? And have you got anyone coming up that we should look out for?
Well, I'm going to have Chris Bischoff on next. He'll be talking about his that art direction that he took on his Beautiful Desolation game. Other people, I always have people in the, that I'm trying to get on, thinking about maybe returning guests, but I usually don't think too far ahead with the show. Kind of more of a seat in my pants kind of guy.
Oh, we have that in common then.
Well, we were talking about Ken Williams before, and you said he's got a book coming out, so I'm thinking I might try to see if I could chat him up.
No, I think you should do it. Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Yeah,
he's such an interesting guy. We could have spent hours talking to him.
Yeah, I want to hear your chat too.
Yeah, check it out.
Well, we thoroughly recommend your channel to all our listeners. And, there's a lot of crossover with guests, but you've got video as well. So there's the extra aspect. And a lot of the interviews are two-parters as well. So they're quite big.
Well, now we can have, I guess, as many hours as we want. We just go to the point of exhaustion. A lot better than that 10-minute clip. That's something I've really been intrigued by because, I like as a professor, I'm kind of interested in the media studies side of all this. Like I would have assumed that people wouldn't be interested, in watching like a 6-hour long gameplay video. Like they would watch about 10 minutes of it and say, okay, that's enough. Move on to the next thing. People's attention spans aren't that. This has been the argument for so long is that attention spans are getting narrower and narrower and short. But I actually see the opposite happening. It's like the YouTube videos are getting longer and longer and podcasts are getting, there's like 6-7 hour long podcasts out there. Mm-hmm. Like Dan Carlin stuff, like 8-hour long podcast and people are thrilled about it.
Yeah, I think there's room for all that context. I love putting your videos on when I've got something to do and I can leave it playing and just have it on while I'm working or something because you don't want to click a 10-minute video every 10 minutes. I think that long form content definitely does have a place.
Yeah, that's a good point. Some people tell me they just turn it on when they're having a hard time falling asleep and it plays and the soothing sound of your voice, I don't know how I feel about that. Is that a compliment or an insult? I don't.
Well, Matt, your videos are, they're so interesting and everyone should check it out. We'll put a link in our show notes. Matt Chat on
I really
YouTube.
Appreciate that. I'm happy to reciprocate.
Fantastic.